Hello guys, welcome back to this channel. Today, we're going to rank all 22 Flash Season 5 episodes. I just want to say one thing. Next video, I will be hanging this new poster up around here somewhere. It's not going to go up there, there's no more room. Probably there's two spots for it. Over here where you probably can't see it, right here where you could potentially see it, or even under here, but I'll figure it out. Not much else to say. We can get, and also I will be sharing my experience at the Marvel exhibit, which I went to about a week ago. So, but let's get started right into this video. Flash Season 5 episodes ranked. Coming in at number 22, we have Newsflash. I mean, my problem with this one, it's just dull. Like, instead of that, we should have had an episode maybe focusing on Cisco, because I think I mentioned this in my review, but after episode 3. They should have just Cisco should have just lost his powers 100%. And this episode could have dealt with like a fallout of that. That would have been great. But instead we got this really weird plotline involving news that manipulates characters to do bad things or stuff like that. It's just such a weird plotline for an episode of The Flash. It just doesn't really work. And that's why it's this low. This episode is just not very good. Coming in number 21, we have Gone Rogue. I was expecting this one to be last place when I was watching it, but there's still some decent things. Ragdoll's actually a pretty good villain, but other than that, Ragdoll, I like the end of the episode with Nora and Barry. That's a pretty good scene. Everything else, the whole Rogues team-up idea, especially happening this late in the season, is not a good idea. Especially with the Rogues they decide to use. Bug-Eye Bandit, why did they bring her back? She's better than she was in Arrow Season 4, I'll say that. But she's still not a good villain. Leather Witch is even, I think she was pretty good in episodes 7 and 10, but she's not a good villain in this episode. Ragdoll's actually a pretty good villain still, but, I mean, he's not a great character. He's a pretty good villain. He's not a great character. So just a weird Rogues team up as a whole. None of the action sequences really sit right with me. In this episode, just kind of a weird one. It should have been placed much earlier in the season, not the third to last episode. So it falls kind of flat. At the top 20, we have episode 5, All Dolled Up. Unlike the last two, this one's a little bit more enjoyable. Ragdoll's also a good villain here. But the problem is, there's just a bunch of not good scenes. Iris jumping off a building, just first, it defies the laws of physics, and second, the way it turns Nora back into, like, liking Iris again, it's just such a weird way to do it. It just doesn't work. As a whole, this episode's just kind of weird, and Ragdoll is probably its biggest thing that moves it up. I don't know if it was a worse villain with a worse power set, I guess. I don't even think this episode would be lower than the other two. So, overall, just kind of eh. Coming in number, 19, we have episode 13, Gold-Faced. Overall, the plotline involving Ralph and Barry doing the black market investigation with Gold-Face, I actually really like that. Mostly because of Ralph and Barry's, them teaming up again, which you don't really see that anymore. Like, you saw that quite a bit throughout season 4, but you don't really see that all season 5, really, except for this episode, and I find that actually pretty fun. But other than that, the Sherlock plotline involving all Sherlock's wives was just terrible. It gets better as you go on into like the last couple episodes, but in this episode, it's just not good. And then also you have the final thing. And then there's Iris breaking into Cicada's house. And then Iris practically defeating Cicada. That's just terrible. But as a whole, this episode, it's fine. It's really enjoyable, but nothing to write home about. Coming in at number 18, we have episode 10, The Flash and the Furious. This episode, it's alright, I guess. It just doesn't have too much to offer. The whole thing with Nora and Weather Witch, I just didn't really care for that. This episode's pretty much flashless, except for like the beginning 5 minutes of the episode, so that's kind of annoying. And this is one of those episodes where I just didn't like Nora as a whole. The most interesting part about this episode is the whole kind of introduction to the Batmobile, sort of, and because there's like a Wayne Enterprises car, and you do see that in the episode. That's pretty cool. Nothing much else that there is, and this is an okay episode. Still enjoyable, still watchable, but not much to say. Number 17 with episode 19, Snowpack. This is where we start to get into the pretty good episodes, I would say. It's still just alright. Like, I don't like Caitlyn's mother. I don't think that's a good character. I don't think Caitlyn's Icicle is a very good villain. He's better than Caitlyn's mother, but he's still not that good. And as a whole, this episode is just kind of weird with the way it plays out, especially when you get to the end of it when Cicada just appears out of nowhere, or Cicada version 2, I guess, and she steals that thing. I don't know if it really works, but it's fine, I guess. Some of the ice sequences are pretty cool. Nora's role is okay, I guess. What Iris does and she talks to Thawne, I thought that was a great scene. But as a whole, throughout this episode, the whole package, not so great. Number 16, we have episode 11, Seeing Red. My biggest problem with this one is just the way they deal with the Cicada plotline. This is where it really starts to go downhill. They should have killed him off in this episode. It would have made sense in light of what they've set up for him. But, I mean, then they could just keep using him and using him. This is when they should have killed him off. And then maybe brought in either Cicada version 2 or Reverse Flash. That could have been interesting. But what all they did is literally just have another fight and see Cicada's plot line just kind of continue. It doesn't quite work. My least favorite part about this episode, actually, it's not the Cicada stuff. I don't really care for Norvok as a character. They tried the redemption arc thing. They've done this 3 times for characters in the season. The other 2 times have worked a lot more. They've done this for King Shark. They did this for Norvok. And then this doesn't quite count, but then they did this for Nora. I guess. I don't know if that one really counts. But still, like, they try the redemption arc thing here, and it doesn't quite work. Like, it's worked in the past on the show, like, especially with Leonard Snart, but here, it doesn't really work. Number 15, we have episode 1, Nora. My biggest problem is that they just don't really do much in this episode. I do love seeing Wally West on the show again. This is the last time I think you see him on the show, for at least that I know of. I think he's in season 6. At least I hope he is. So, as a whole, this episode, it just doesn't, there's not much offered to me, I guess. And it's just kind of dull. It's not that good. I like seeing Nora for the first time. She's a pretty fun character in this episode. Flash's suit is just terrible. I never really mentioned this in my review, but it's terrible. Especially in the first batch of episodes. But then it becomes better as it goes on. The cowl just does not look good on Barry, and yeah. But as a whole, this episode, it's still pretty enjoyable. It's still entertaining, but probably my second least favorite premiere of the show, just ahead of Flash, just behind not Flashpoint, Man Who Saved Central City from season 2. Coming in at number 14, meet The Girl with the Red Lightning. As a whole, this episode, it's actually pretty good. But as a penultimate episode, I don't know. I mean, it just kind of feels it feels more like a season finale than a penultimate episode. This kind of should have maybe concluded the Cicada storyline and then just brought Reverse Flash, and then had that scene where Reverse Flash gets out of prison, and then the episode ends, and then stuff happens, and then they get a plan to kill Reverse Flash or find out what's going to happen with that. That could have been really interesting, but what they do, they just don't do much. I wish they just did a bit more these last 2 episodes. And the finale, I think, is great because of the Reverse Flash stuff, and you'll see that much higher. But the penultimate episode is just down pretty low. It's like almost halfway throughout the list, I guess. Number 13, we have episode 6, Icicle Cometh. My problem with this episode is just like the whole Icicle storyline doesn't quite work. They haven't quite figured out what to do with Caitlyn in season 4 and 5. I like what they do with her in season 5 more than season 4, I'll say that. Because with season 4, they just try to do this with the plotline with Amanda Black and her working through the black market. It's just so weird. And then this season, they try to incorporate her parents. Here, I kind of some of the dramatic stuff actually works pretty well. It doesn't have any of the cool ice action sequences that Snowpack has, but the story I think is a lot better in this episode. And as a whole, this is a pretty good episode. Coming in number 12, we have episode 2, Blocked. This is probably Cicada's most menacing, episode 2 and 3, and I think it does show. Blocked is not a very good villain, but who cares? That's not the point. The whole point is the end of the episode with Cicada. And he kicks Team Flash's butts, and it's a great scene. I mean, as you can see, it does downgrade as you go on. Really, episode 11 and on, that's when it starts downgrading, but still. This is actually a pretty good episode. This restarts again the really good episodes as a whole, and I actually really like this one. The only problem is that Block's not a very good villain. Some of the CGI here is just not good, but as a whole, I do enjoy this episode. Coming in at number 11 is episode 3, Death of Vi. These two were kind of tied, but I put this one ahead just because of the introduction to Sherlock Wells and the dramatic scene at the end with supposedly Vi dying, which I think he should have officially lost his powers instead of what they did, because it just doesn't make too much sense. And as a whole, I think this actually is a great episode, great title for an episode, and it works as in the structure of its season. Sherlock Wells is a great introduction, probably the best introduction of any of the other Welleses that they've incorporated into the show. Harry Wells is kind of a weird introduction, and then H.R. Wells, I mean, still. But as a whole, I think Sherlock Wells is a great introduction. Him getting right to his antics into solving this mystery involving this killer, which is Cicada. And I think that's actually really interesting. Coming in at number 10, we have episode 14, Cause and Excess. I was about to say Cause and Effect, but whatever. Cause and Excess is a really fun time loop episode. Second time the Arrowverse has played with the time loop. They did it back in Legend Season 3, here with episode 11, Here I Go Again. I like that episode a little more just because it kind of fleshes out the time loop storyline a bit better than this episode does. But it's a really fun time loop episode as a whole. It's pretty much flashless, which is another problem with episode 10. But I think this is the only flashless episode I'd say that it kind of works because the plotline did deal with Nora. And this is one of those episodes where I feel like she's a bit more likable than she's been in some of the other episodes. And that's why I like this one a bit more. But as a whole, it's still not that good of an episode. But I do really enjoy it. And I still think this is a fun episode. I love seeing Ralph a bit more throughout this episode. Killer Frost gets a bit more to do. Cisco, I like Cisco and Camilla's plotline. This is the middle of the season where I like Cisco the most. Episode 12 and 14 especially. And I actually really enjoy this one. My only problem is that I think maybe they could have actually killed off Cicada here, because they kind of set something up. It would have been a weird way to kill off Cicada, but it still would have worked. I would have been fine with that. And it would have concluded the Cicada plotline pretty well. And then they throw in Reverse Flash, because I'm just getting kind of tired of the Cicada plotline here. But it's a really fun episode. Take this as its own, great. Coming in at number 9, we have episode 7, Oh Come All Ye Thankful. I wish Weather Wizard was the actual villain instead of Weather Witch, because I don't think she's as good of a character. The way they kill off Weather Wizard is kind of I wouldn't say a disgrace to episode 15 of season 1, but it just doesn't quite work. It's kind of funny in a way, but it's not as bad as some the times they've killed off characters in the Arrowverse, especially when you look at Arrow with Amanda Waller and Laurel Lance in season 4. But whatever, who cares? But overall, my favorite part about this episode is all the Cicada stuff as a whole, like seeing Cicada and his kind of back and why his motivations and why he's doing this involves his niece, I think. I thought that was really interesting. But as a whole, this episode, not too much to offer here, but I do really enjoy it. Coming in number 8, we have episode 12, Memorabilia. I actually like this episode more than I think a lot of people do. I think this episode's quite underrated. It does a lot. I love all the sequences with them going to the Flash Museum through Nora's mind, and then them visiting Grace's mind too. I thought that was all interesting. And the way Nora's kind of treated and the way Grace is treating, all that's really interesting. And this kind of maybe should have been like a setup episode, and then the next episode they kill Cicada off. That would have been really cool, and I would have really liked that. Coming in at number 7, we have episode 16, Failures in Orphan. This is really legit getting to the great episodes. This is a great episode. The way they conclude the Cicada plotline actually works. It makes sense. They should have done this like 3 or 4 episodes earlier, but who cares? This is a great episode. I think the best part is the end where they bring in Cicada version 2. She's a lot more menacing than Cicada 1 was. And it made for a great start to this character, even though it turned out to be even worse than the first Cicada. And I mean, this episode is still quite good. It's really interesting. They tap into some more of the Reverse Flash stuff in this part of the season, and I do really enjoy that. Near the end of the season started to get really good, and this is kind of the start to that. Coming in number 6, we have episode 17, Time Bomb. I thought the next episode was even better than Failures in Orphan. And as a whole, the whole Time Bomb plotline is actually really interesting. Some of the Cicada version 2 stuff is actually quite good. My problem is that Cicada 2 is just not a good character. This is where they kind of botched the character. They kind of should have just not done this character. Should have just carried on with the plotline, and then maybe you see Grace come back in maybe episode 16 to help Orlin, and then maybe they do something with that, and then maybe they bring in Reverse Flash as they destroy the dagger. That could have been really interesting. So yeah, I would have really liked that. But overall, there's not too much that's offered in this episode. But the best part about this episode is the end when Nora reveals to Team Flash that she's working with the Reverse Flash. Great scene, really well acted, and the way that sets up episode 18 and 19 really works for me. The payoff wasn't as good as the setup, but this episode still really worked. Number 5 is episode 18, Godspeed. I don't care if Godspeed was not really that good of a villain. That doesn't matter to me. I love seeing the future, and Nora's whole plot line throughout this episode is great. I love seeing how she kind of started this is kind of her origin story, to be honest, and then her working with the Reverse Flash to go back in time, help, Barry and Iris to help kill DeVoe and stop the Enlightenment, and that caused the Enlightenment anyways, and then have then the Cicada plotline, like he's plotting out everything, and this is where you kind of start to see that in what's been going on, and you kind of see Nora in the Flash Museum. I thought that's all really interesting, and as a whole, I think this is a great episode. And even though Godspeed's not a very good character, I wish they titled the episode something else, but that's okay. I don't really care. Coming in at number 4, we have episode 22, Legacy. My problem with this episode, it's a great episode as a whole, but it doesn't quite work with concluding the season because it feels like it's smashing 1.5 episodes into one episode. They should have been split into part of the episode takes place in Girl with the Red Lightning, and then the other part takes place in this episode, or maybe they add an episode to make this whole Reverse Flash storyline into 2 parts, and that could have really set up something, and then maybe Girl with the Red Lightning, and then so that would have been really interesting. And as a whole, I wish this episode could have been better, but I still think it's a great season finale, much better than Finish Line and We Are the Flash from seasons 3 and 4, and that really works for me, but still not quite as good as the top 3. Coming on number 3, we have King Shark vs. Gorilla Grodd. I was expecting to put this episode at number 1, to be honest. I kind of really enjoy monster fights. Like, I enjoyed Godzilla vs. King Kong. That was a pretty fun movie. And I've enjoyed some other monster fights. I bet Alien vs. Predator is a good movie. At least the first one. The second one I heard is horrible. All those kind of boss fights, I feel like always tend to be really fun. This is another good example of that. My problem, I wish they did more of the King Shark vs. Gorilla Grodd fights, because it doesn't feel like they did that many. And this works more as a King Shark episode than as a Gorilla Grodd episode. This is Of all the Gorilla Grodd episodes, this is probably my second least favorite, if you take it as a Gorilla Grodd episode. I like this more than Guerrilla Warfare, at least. But as a whole, this is still a really fun episode. Really, I loved all the action sequences near the end. And I really liked also the beginning with the King Shark's redemption arc. I mentioned they do the redemption arc thing a lot in this season. And this is probably the time it worked the most. But with Norvok, it didn't work. Here it does. And it comes in at number 3. At number 2, these two are tied, to be honest, but I'm only putting number 1 and number 1 because it's an actual episode of the season, and this is the crossover episode, Elseworlds Hour 1. This is a really fun episode. I love seeing Barry and Oliver do like a live swap. Really excited for the next part, which I'm not going to be doing Arrow Season 7 for a while, because I'm going to do What If, and then I'm going to rank all the Bond movies. I'll talk more about that in a little while, in a different video. But as a whole, really enjoy this episode. So much fun. There's a lot to it. I don't have any problems really, except for the fact I wish there was a bit more action in it. Like, the only action sequences that I'd say are really good are near the end. And although I love seeing Barry and Oliver do like a live swap, especially that scene where he's like, "You have failed the city." That's actually really funny, and it does really work for me. And as a whole, I really enjoy this episode, and I am really excited for the next crossover episode. But it's not number 1 just because I kind of would rather put an episode of the season at number 1, because the only episodes I feel like that I put crossover episodes at are when the crossover episode absolutely dominates the rest of the season, like Supergirl Season 3, Flash Season 3. Those are the only 2 I think I'd put the crossover episode at number 1. Well, Arrow Season 5, Legends Season 2. Yeah, no. None of those other seasons I put the crossover episode number 1. A bunch of those, the crossover episodes have been lower. Like, Legends Season 3, I think, is the only other season besides the Legends of Yesterday, Legends of Today crossover, the Heroes Join Forces crossover episodes, where I put lower in the season. But whatever. As a whole, this is actually a really good episode, and I really enjoy it. And yeah. Coming in at number 1, we have episode 8, What's Past is Prologue. Not the perfect mid-season finale for the Flash as a whole. There's been a few better ones. Like, for example, I think the present, I would say, is even maybe a little, no. I feel like as a 100th episode of The Flash, this episode's fantastic. Not as good as the 100th episode of Arrow, but seeing them go back to sequence scenes in seasons 3, 2, 1, even a little bit in season 4, and you kind of get more and more as it goes on. I love seeing all of this stuff. And my favorite part of it probably was the scene when they go back to season 2, after when they want to take the thing from Star Labs in that episode, and seeing Zoom again. That's great, because with Zoom, you kind of forget how menacing the character was, and it's really cool to see him again. I wish Zoom was seen again in more episodes besides this, but I want to see him again in another episode. I've wanted to see him again really since, I want to say, like season 3, where they did a horrible job with Black Flash, at least as a character. I wish they did more with that. They literally just killed him off in the dumbest way ever, but it doesn't matter. Then going back to season 1, seeing you see Reverse Flash again, especially building on what they did in season 2 with the Piper episode, wherever it's called. And this is a really fun episode, and I really enjoy it. My one problem, the cicada stuff near the end, just doesn't quite work. But I think as a whole, this is definitely the best episode of the season. It's really close with number 2, but I put it at number 1. So thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios.